There are a lot of legendary creatures out there, and any one of them could be your commander. Some are obviously not so good, but some feel purposefully made to feel at the helm of a deck. A lot of the top commanders in the EDH format are legendary creatures that have a lot of synergy built into them from the get-go. By this, I mean that the card's abilities are already pushing you to build in a very specific way in order to utilize that creature's abilities. When you look through EDH Rec, you see a ton of commanders that are almost entirely utilized in one specific way. You have the Dragon, Lathril Blade of the Elves, Edgar Markov, Miriam Sentinel Worm, Gishaf's Son's Avatar, Giada Font of Hope. Now, a lot of these are creature-specific type decks, and that has a massive impact on the kind of decks you can build with those commanders. But there's plenty of other cards that have a very specific game plan in mind that, while not entirely forcing you to, push you to build solely around that game plan. You're probably not going to build a Spellslinger Ishin Two Heavens as one deck, or an Angel Tribal Shorokai Genesis engine. And that's totally fine. I think it's great that there are some commander options that synergize heavily with one playstyle. It still has players that might not be too familiar with the game or are just super interested in that one playstyle to build a deck that has innate synergy. If you absolutely love vampires, why not build an Edgar Markov deck? It's literally the best and only thing to really do with him, and he is incredibly strong at it too. But once you start to build enough decks that feel at the top of the game, or maybe you just aren't that interested in building something so obvious, it gets old really quickly. It starts to feel like the most straightforward answer to the deck building puzzle you've just opened up. Feel like making a Dragons deck? Oh, I guess your commander should be the Dragon or Miriam. Otherwise, you're just worse than all the others, right? Well, kind of, yeah, in a pure power level sense. Besides the fact that what's actually in your deck matters way more than your commander. But I think there's a whole nother reason to why we're playing Commander and not just CEDH. We're trying to brew something that is fun and exciting, and hopefully it brings us and maybe even our opponents some joy when we get time to play. I find you end up down two paths, and one is to find a commander that isn't as popular or not quite as good and try to get them rolling. Building a zombies deck, instead of Wilhelt the Rockcleaver, why not run Gisa the Hellraiser? There's about 18 times less decks. I mean, it's a commander that requires a little extra tuning and some other game plans to pull off, but still packs an absolute punch. Just going through the game tags or the style of kind of deck you want to make and finding some less played commanders is an excellent way to feel like you're building a deck that stands out from the masses. But what of the other path? A path a little harder to dredge through. The path of, but what if I like the overpowered commander? Sometimes you spot a commander and think, holy shit, that looks so cool. I love how that interacts and I like the game plan that comes attached. Only to learn that there are 15,000 decks that are using that exact commander. Or you find a commander that you think looks cool but is forced into building one certain way and there seems to be no other way around it. Unless... Here comes the personal anecdote time and the introduction to the deck tech of the video. I was one of the very few people who actually seemed somewhat interested in Assassin's Creed's MTG release. While I've only played a few of the games and, mostly 2 and Brotherhood, I thought that the series' style and gameplay could make for an interesting take in the card game realm. While not everything they released tickled my fancy, there were 2 cards that specifically did. First off being Cassandra Eaglebearer for an insane ability to pull weapons out of your deck and to draw cards when wielding weapons. And also Altair. Altair interested me because his specific ability is not like anything else we've really seen before, and I think it perfectly resembles the game's ideology. Altair strikes from the shadows and his brotherhood of assassins appear from nowhere to do the same. I really like his exile his own graveyard to get continued effectiveness of it, ramping as you put more and more creatures' cards into exile with the memory counters on them. But there is one problem. He can only do it with assassins. While this fits the game's lore perfectly, I was pretty sickened with the disdain that I would have to build him in one way and one way only. And I mean this to no offense to anyone who's built an Altair deck with assassins, but Every deck I could find looked exactly the same. Chuck in the best assassins, throw them into the graveyard, and exile them back into combat. I was quite frustrated and I eventually gave up on them until I one day randomly remembered about the card and looked it up on EDH Rec. I thought to myself, I see nothing has changed, everyone's running the same things, but I wonder what combos people have thought up by now. As I started to look through the combos, my mind started to light up. There was one that really caught my eye. Altair plus Vigilance plus Bloodthirster makes infinite combats? How the fuck do you do that? Bloodthirster isn't an assassin, he's a big old demon. And then it all started to click. I looked up all the items that would allow me to transform non-assassins into assassins, because nowhere on Altair's text does it say it has to be an assassin to be copied, as long as it's a creature with a memory counter on it. And that was it. How do I build an Altair deck with no assassins? Well, there is one, but we'll get to that. Firstly, we have a plan, that's great, but we need to figure out the pieces. Altair is our commander, and we also want creatures that we want to put into combat again and again and again. We need to make these creatures that aren't assassins into assassins. We need a reliable way to get those assassin maker cards, and finally to get those creature cards into our graveyard. There's a lot of moving pieces, and we need a way to make it all reasonably reliable. First, I wanted to find every piece that would allow me to make our creatures assassins, aka Assassin School. From what I could find in Mardu, there are 5, sort of, and if anyone can find any others, that would be fantastic. I found Ashes of the Fallen, Conspiracy, Maskwood Nexus, Roshan Hidden Magister, and as a sort of the Animus. The thing that all of these cards are doing, besides the Animus, is making our creatures in our graveyards any creature type that we choose, or specifically an assassin. The most important text on at least most of these is creatures that we control that are not on the battlefield, with Ashes of the Fallen specifically caring about the graveyard. Roshan is our only other assassin to Altair, and it's because he's one of the only sources of this ability, and he specifically makes them assassins. The Animus is not something that transforms our creatures to assassins, but it does allow us to exile a legendary creature with a memory counter, and this counts for Altair. It's ultimately the worst of the bunch, but any increase to drawing one of these is better, but could be taken out if you wanted to. We will get to the creatures shortly, but first are some more easy decisions. We need to get the cards that make our creatures assassins, and we need a way to get those creatures into the bin. Firstly is our buses to Assassin School. We are running 7 tutors, all with the goal of getting our pieces that transform our creatures into assassins. We have Inline Tutor, which can get Ashes of the Fallen or Maskwood Nexus, Final Parting, which can get any of them and a creature into the graveyard for use, Gamble and Reckless Handling, which has a sense of randomness about it, but can also discard a creature that we're looking to exile later as well. We have Idyllic Tutor that can only specifically get Conspiracy, which isn't fantastic, but is better than nothing. And we have Vampiric Tutor and Insatiable Avarice, which can grab any of them. Now, there's obviously more options to run, especially in black, like Demonic Tutor and Imperial Seal, but I didn't want the budget of this deck to get out of hand. Most of the time I dislike tutors. I think they feel most fair in decks that don't have a specific multi-card combo win con, and when that is the case, they feel kind of useless most of the time. But here we are on a mission, not to outright win the game, but to have a fighting chance, so I think they are well placed here. We also have some cards that put our newly trained assassins into the graveyard. Get their scholarships. We run 10 cards to draw and discard. We also run Sneak Attack so we can play our creatures for cheap and sacrifice them at the end of turn, and 3 Graveyard Tutors to find the goodies. I actually kind of dislike the Graveyard Tutors. I wish there were cards that did the same effect but just pulled cards from the top of our library. That would add a lot of more variety to the deck, which I recommend almost doing that when you tutor anyway, if you feel the same way as I do. Now for our newly trained assassins. We have 20 creatures that we can utilize pretty well, and I purposefully tried to make each of them feel different from each other. Because Altair expects a tribal deck from us, I felt in order to flip that on its head, having no tribal connections at all felt perfect. We have Angel of Serenity, which acts as removal, Engraft's Marauders, which double damage, Archon of Cruelty, which is sacrifice, draw, and opponent discard, Aspiring Champion, which allows us to reveal creatures from the top of our deck and put them onto the battlefield, Bloodthirster, which is extra combats, Burnished Heart, which is ramp, Combustible Gearhulk, which works as draw and mill, depending on what our opponents feel, Dragon Mage, which wheels every player, which is more for yourself but can ruin your opponent's game plans. Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight, which also doubles damage. Hellkite Tyrant, which steals artifacts. Ioris, God of Victory, which gives our creatures some evasion. Khan the Betrayer, which acts as card draw. Massacre Worm, which acts as a mini board wipe. Nayeli, Sun's Vanguard, which gives our tokens double strike and lets us impulse draw. Noxious Gearhulk, which works as removal. Phyrexian Obliterator, which is also sort of removal or just a fuck ton of damage. Sepulchral Primordial, no idea if I'm saying that correctly, steals things from people's graveyards. Solemn Simulacrum, which is more ramp. The Master Multiplied, which lets us keep our tokens even when Altair's trigger goes on the stack. And Vile Entomber, which gives us a graveyard tutor to constantly get the cards we want into the graveyard. As you can see, there are a lot of different options when it comes to what you will bring out of the shadows, but each creature gives you a lot of value. There is one other creature that belongs to another category of cards which I have decided to mostly remove. Those are Vigilance Givers. Altair has two specific combos, one with Bloodthirster and another with Portraiser, where when you give Altair Vigilance and one of these two creatures a memory counter, you can pretty easily achieve infinite combat steps. I decided against having this as a feature of my deck. I think having Vihan and the Bloodthirster as an option to tutor later in the game is fine. It definitely ends the game if you need it to, but I want this deck to win for its value engine, not because of a 3-card combo. There is one last thing Altair needs before he takes down your opponents, and that's his trusty tools. Altair needs to attack, and he does not have the haste to go down swinging every time, so we want to make him as deadly as possible, and for the most part, that is making him fly. Giving Altair access to some console commands has truly made him a terror, and now he is flying through walls and hitting whoever he wants. And that's important because we want him to swing every single turn. Building this deck has probably been the most fun I've had on my MTG deck building journey, mostly because it felt like the most puzzling of them all. I have built decks that are strong, that achieve a certain tone, or a deck that tries to win in a certain way, but this felt like all of those challenges combined and more some. So where do we end? I made this video not just so I could show off my Altair deck, but to help express a point that I think is important. Make your decks stupidly. It's okay to build with the goal of being the best and building what has been done before, but you know what hasn't been done before? You building a deck that you find stupidly fun for stupid reasons. So even if that commander has tens of thousands of decks, find a way to do it stupidly and have a bit of fun with it. And then I think you've achieved truly what's great about Commander. You've had some fun. Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts, feelings, questions, qualms, queries, prayers, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll give it a read. I'll put down in the description any of the deck lists and decks that I've brought up throughout the video, and I'll see you later.